Highways, they're vast, lonely, and sometimes more dangerous than we'd like to believe. From unexplained disappearances to encounters that defy logic, the open road can turn into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. Today, we're counting down 5 disturbing true highway horror stories that'll have you gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Trust me, you don't want to miss number 1. It's the kind of story that stays with you long after the ride is over. Let's hit the road. Story 5: The Lone Passenger. It was a chilly night as Mike, a seasoned truck driver, made his way along the desolate stretch of I-80. His headlights barely pierced the thick blackness surrounding him. He'd driven through countless long nights before, but something about this night felt different. As the minutes ticked by, the low hum of the engine and the occasional screech of tires on the asphalt were the only sounds. Suddenly, Mike's eyes flicked to a figure up ahead, standing on the roadside waving frantically. It was unusual to see anyone out here in the middle of nowhere, especially so late at night. The man appeared desperate, though he wasn't acting erratic or aggressive. Just a lone traveler, likely stranded. Against his better judgment, Mike pulled over. He rolled down the window, the cold air biting at his skin. "You need a lift," Mike called out, squinting in the dark. The man nodded, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. "Yeah, I'd appreciate it," the man said in a deep, gravelly voice. He climbed into the passenger seat, and as Mike resumed his journey, he noticed the man didn't make any small talk. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't normal either. At first, Mike didn't think much of it. He asked the usual questions. Where was the man headed? What brought him out here in the middle of the night? The answers were vague. "Home," the man replied simply. The way he said it sent a shiver down Mike's spine, but he pushed it aside, trying to focus on the road. Hours passed, the truck rumbling down the long, empty highway. As the night grew deeper, Mike began to notice something strange. The man's shadow, while faint, like everyone else's under the dim glow of the dashboard light, wasn't there at all. He tried not to look, chalking it up to the dim lighting, but it made his heart race. The real dread settled in when Mike glanced at his side mirror. The passenger was gone. The seat was empty. He slammed his foot on the brakes, the truck swerving slightly on the road as his pulse skyrocketed. He checked the passenger seat again, and then the back seat, locking eyes with the rearview mirror. The man wasn't in the truck anymore. His mind raced. The doors were locked. The truck hadn't stopped moving. Mike could feel the hair on his neck stand up as he scanned the dark road for any sign of the strange passenger. Nothing. No sign of anyone. He looked at the dashboard, still on. The truck was still running. Terror gripped him. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered under his breath. The engine hummed steadily beneath him, but the silence in the cabin felt suffocating. The faintest whispers of wind rushed in from the slightly open window, but the chilling, empty seat beside him gave off a sense of wrongness that only deepened the longer he drove. Mike finally pulled over at the next truck stop, shaken to the core, and checked the entire truck, under the seats, the cargo area, even the roof rack. There was no sign of the mysterious man. To this day, Mike's gut still tightens when he recalls the eerie feeling of that night. But more than the terror, the mystery lingered. Who or what had been sitting next to him in that truck? And most terrifying of all, what did he want? Story 4. The Vanishing Car. The fog on Route 66 was so thick it felt like a blanket smothering the night. Sarah and Adam, a young couple, were driving through this isolated stretch on their way to a much-needed weekend getaway. The road ahead was barely visible, and the dim glow of their headlights only illuminated a few feet in front of them. They were both feeling slightly uneasy, but they brushed it off as the fatigue from the long drive setting in. The air in the car was heavy, but the warmth of their shared quiet was comforting, until the faint flicker of headlights appeared in their rearview mirror. At first, they thought it was just another car, maybe a truck passing by. But as the car drew closer, it stayed right behind them. The headlights weren't just bright. They were blinding, right in their rearview mirror, close enough to make Adam squint. He glanced at Sarah, who was already looking back at him with a furrowed brow. "Maybe they need to get around us," Sarah said, her voice tinged with unease. Adam pressed the gas, trying to let the car pass, but the headlights didn't pull away. They were still there, tailing them closely. Sarah looked over at Adam. "Why is it following us?" she asked, her voice shaky. The anxiety grew thicker in the air between them, their hearts pounding. Adam hesitated for a moment, glancing at Sarah. "I don't know," he said, his voice strained. "I'll slow down, see if it'll go around." He gently tapped the brakes. The headlights seemed to flicker. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the car behind them vanished. The road was empty. No headlights. No sound. Adam's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the side mirror. He pulled over to the shoulder, Sarah's voice a soft whisper in the background. What was that?" They sat in the car, staring out into the fog. Neither of them said a word. They waited for a few minutes, just breathing. But then, ahead of them, another set of headlights appeared. It was the same car, parked at an odd angle on the shoulder, its hazard lights flashing. Adam's stomach dropped. "Should we check if someone needs help?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but full of uncertainty. "No," Adam replied. "I don't think we should stop." With a sense of dread washing over them, Adam drove past, the eyes of the parked car somehow feeling like they were watching them. But then, when they had driven a few miles further, the headlights were back. In their rearview mirror, the car was tailing them again, impossibly close. This time, they weren't sure if they should pull over. They debated for miles, until the car suddenly disappeared again, as though it had been swallowed by the thick fog. The unsettling pattern repeated itself until eventually the car vanished completely. But even as they made their way to their destination, the mystery of the car and its strange behavior stayed with them. It wasn't until years later that Sarah and Adam heard a chilling story about a phantom car on Route 66 that followed travelers in the fog. They wondered if it had been an encounter with something otherworldly, a car that had no driver, or perhaps one who didn't need to be seen. Story 3. The Gas Station Warning. It was a long drive, the kind of journey where the night felt endless and the road stretched out in front of her like a never-ending tunnel. Emily was a lone traveler, accustomed to the solitude of her nighttime drives. But as she pulled into a small run-down gas station, something didn't feel right. The station was nearly empty, and the fluorescent lights overhead hummed and buzzed, casting flickering shadows across the cracked pavement. As Emily stepped out to fill up, she noticed the gas station attendant watching her from the window. He didn't greet her or say a word. His eyes, wide and fixed, never left her as she swiped her card. There was something unsettling about his stare, something desperate. She shrugged it off and paid for her gas, ready to continue her journey. But before she could leave, the attendant's voice cut through the silence, low and urgent. "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling, "you need to come inside now." Emily paused, confused. She glanced around. Nothing seemed out of place. The night was calm, the station eerily quiet. Why would she need to go inside? But the man's tone shifted, becoming more insistent. "There's someone in your back seat," he whispered, his eyes flicking nervously toward her car. Her heart skipped a beat. What? What are you talking about?" she asked, feeling her chest tighten with rising anxiety. The attendant stepped closer to her, his voice dropping even lower. "Please, just trust me." Panic surged through her. She glanced at her car. She had left the door unlocked while pumping gas. She quickly ducked into the building, her mind racing with all sorts of horrible scenarios. She could feel her heart pounding as she glanced at the attendant, who immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived, and Emily nervously led them to her car. When they opened the back door, they found a man crouched inside, his eyes wild with madness, holding a knife. He had been lying in wait, hoping for the perfect moment to strike. The police took the man into custody, but Emily couldn't shake the image of his dark, unblinking eyes. There was something unnatural in the way he looked at her, as if he knew more about her than he should. Later, when the man was questioned, his story didn't make sense. He claimed he had been waiting for her to arrive. But why? Why her? The memory of that gas station and the attendant's warning haunted Emily for years. It had been a close call, but she never forgot the strange, uneasy feeling that had washed over her when the attendant first made eye contact. Story 2. The Creepy RV. It was supposed to be the perfect road trip. A group of 5 friends, James, Mia, Clara, Ethan, and Sophie, had been planning this getaway for months. The kind of road trip that would bond them with endless laughter and memories. The plan was simple: travel through some of the most scenic, desolate stretches of the country and camp under the stars. They all piled into 2 separate cars, with Ethan and Sophie leading the way in one vehicle and the others following in the second. Music blared from the speakers. Snacks were passed around, and they joked about everything from high school memories to their latest celebrity crushes. But by the time they reached the Nevada border, the mood started to shift. The sun had set hours ago, and they were deep in the heart of the loneliest road in America, an eerie and desolate stretch of Highway 50. The road wound through barren desert and rugged mountain terrain, with only the occasional gas station or small town. There were no other cars for miles. It was then they first noticed the RV. At first, it seemed like just another vehicle on the road, a standard, slightly worn camper van. It was no different than the countless others they had passed that night, all travelers making their way through the empty highway. But the RV stayed behind them, almost too close, as if it was intentionally trailing them. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, his unease growing. "Hey, is that RV still behind us?" he asked. Mia, who was sitting in the passenger seat of the car following Ethan's, squinted into the rearview mirror. "Yeah, it's been back there for at least 20 minutes. "Do you think they're trying to pass us?" she asked, trying to hide the growing tension in her voice. James laughed it off. Maybe they just got lost. No big deal, right? I mean, it's a long stretch of road out here. Sophie, always the more cautious one, frowned. Yeah, but it feels weird. Why are they sticking so close? It's like they're waiting for us to pull over. Clara, who was sitting in the back of their car, leaned forward, looking out the window. They've been doing that for miles. I don't like it either. Minutes passed. The RV remained glued to their bumper, almost like it had become a part of their convoy. The tension in the car mounted, and Ethan, trying to brush off his growing anxiety, turned the music down. The silence between them felt more oppressive now, and the humming of the tires on the asphalt seemed louder. Finally, they reached a small rest area, the kind where truckers and travelers sometimes stop to stretch their legs. The bright fluorescent lights of the rest stop flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow onto the deserted lot. Ethan pulled in, and the other car followed. The friends all piled out, hoping to shake off the creeping feeling that had settled in their stomachs. But to their shock, the RV followed them, pulling into the same rest area with a slow, deliberate crawl. The friends exchanged uneasy glances as the engine of the RV sputtered and whined, almost as if it was barely running. The air grew still, heavy with an unease they couldn't shake. The RV's door creaked open, and out stepped a man. His face was mostly obscured by a baseball cap, and his posture was stiff and deliberate as he slowly made his way towards them. There was something off about him, a strange, unsettling energy that seemed to seep from his very being. His clothes were tattered, and his movements were mechanical, like a doll on a string. Mia's breath caught in her throat. "Who is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Ethan muttered. "Maybe someone else traveling? Maybe he just wants to stretch his legs too." But as the man came closer, the group fell silent. The closer he got, the colder the air around them seemed to grow. The man didn't say a word. He simply stood there, about 10 feet away, and stared at them with an intensity that made their skin crawl. His eyes, dark, hollow, never blinked. It was as if he was looking right through them, into something beyond the present moment. James, trying to break the tension, stepped forward and called out, "Hey, do you need help with something? Are you okay?" The man didn't reply. He just tilted his head slightly, the corners of his lips twitching into something resembling a smile. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even a smile at all. It was a grimace, a grotesque stretch of his face that felt like a warning. Then, in a voice so faint, it was almost lost to the wind, the man muttered, "You can't run forever." The words chilled them to the bone. Sophie's hand shot to her mouth in shock. "What did he say?" she whispered, barely able to process the words. Clara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "What the hell does that mean?" Before anyone could react, the man turned on his heel and walked back to the RV, never once looking back. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, like he was savoring every second. The friends stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. "Let's go. Now?" Mia finally said, her voice tight with fear. Without another word, they scrambled back into their cars. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he revved the engine, pulling away from the rest stop. The RV stayed behind them, just as it had before. As they drove, the RV followed them for miles, never deviating from their path. It was as if it was part of their convoy now, an ever-present shadow. They tried speeding up, but the RV matched their pace. They tried slowing down, but it did the same. James gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "We can't outrun it," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "It's like it knows where we're going. It won't stop." They had no idea how long they had been driving. Everything seemed to blur together in the anxiety-ridden haze. Desperate, they took an unexpected turn off the highway onto a random side road, hoping to lose the RV. For a moment, they thought they had succeeded. They stopped on the side of the road, hearts pounding, catching their breath. "We're good," Ethan exhaled, his hands shaking as he wiped his forehead. But when they looked up, the RV was nowhere to be seen. Relief flooded them, but it was short-lived. Hours later, as they finally arrived at their destination, an isolated cabin they had rented for the weekend, they stopped to stretch their legs. Ethan turned to glance across the street. His blood ran cold. The same RV was parked there, across the street from the cabin. The man's silhouette was visible inside, sitting in the driver's seat, staring at them. "Why is it following us?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Ethan replied, dread creeping into his voice. "But I don't think we're safe here. We need to leave now." But before they could even react, the RV's lights flickered on, and the man's form slowly stood up. He didn't approach them, but the tension was unbearable. It was like he knew they couldn't escape. The friends, terrified and unsure of what to do, stayed in their car until sunrise. That morning, the RV was gone, leaving behind no trace. But the dread lingered, thick and suffocating. They still wonder who the man was and what he wanted from them. The rest of the trip was haunted by the shadow of that RV. They checked their rearview mirrors every few minutes, half expecting to see it following them again. But it never came. They eventually returned home, but the question still hangs over them. What would have happened if they hadn't outrun it? To this day, they can't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. Story 1. The Disappearing Friend. Two friends, Sarah and Emma, had been planning their cross-country road trip for months. They had dreamed of this adventure together, eager to experience new places, new people, and of course, new memories. It was meant to be a time for laughter, for bonding, and for escaping the grind of daily life. But it was during the quiet hours of the night, after miles of empty roads and endless highway signs, that their trip took a terrifying turn. They had been driving for hours, and the exhaustion was starting to set in. The lights of a small run-down motel appeared on the horizon, looking like a beacon in the distance. It was the perfect place to rest, just a pit stop before continuing their journey the next day. They pulled in, and Sarah went inside to check them in, while Emma stayed behind in the car, her eyes drooping with sleep. Time passed, and the quiet hum of the car engine soon became the only sound in the parking lot. Emma glanced at the clock. 5 minutes turned to 10, then to 30. She started to worry. Sarah hadn't returned yet. Maybe she's just talking to the owner, Emma reasoned, but her unease was growing. She decided to get out of the car and go inside to check on her friend. When she entered the lobby, there was no sign of Sarah. The attendant behind the counter, an older man with thinning hair, looked up in surprise when Emma walked in. "Is everything okay?" Emma asked, her voice slightly shaky. The man's eyes flickered nervously. "What do you mean?" Sarah, my friend. She went inside to check in, but I haven't seen her for a while now. The man blinked. I'm sorry, but no one has checked in tonight. Are you sure she came inside? Emma's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean no one checked in? She looked behind her, hoping Sarah would come walking through the door, laughing about how long the check-in process had taken. But Sarah didn't appear. Desperate for answers, Emma asked the man to show her the security footage. The man hesitated, but eventually complied. What they saw in the grainy footage left Emma speechless. Sarah had entered the lobby as expected, but she never left. Where did she go? Emma whispered, feeling the chill of fear creeping up her spine. The footage showed Sarah approaching the counter, but after that, it was like she simply vanished into thin air. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of what happened next. It was as if she had simply walked out of the frame, leaving no trace. Panic set in as Emma rushed outside, calling Sarah's name, checking around the motel's parking lot. She searched through the nearby woods, in the alleyways, and even by the highway, but there was no sign of her friend, no sign of any struggle. Nothing. The police were called, and an investigation was launched, but there were no leads. The staff at the motel didn't seem to know anything, and the security footage, though disturbing, didn't provide any answers. Sarah had disappeared without a trace. Emma was left alone, with no explanation, no closure. The only thing she had was the chilling memory of that security footage. To this day, Emma wonders what happened to Sarah. What could have caused her to vanish? She has nightmares about that night, about the moments she spent waiting in the car, unaware that something would take Sarah away forever. She will never forget the motel, the unnerving silence of that night, or the haunting question: what truly happened to Sarah in that fleeting moment when she stepped away from Emma's view? Alright, Road Warriors, that wraps up today's list. Which story creeped you out the most? Or do you have a highway horror story of your own? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. Until next time, safe travels, and maybe keep the lights on while you drive tonight.